Data centers in space. What's the verdict? What does the squad say about this topic?
KillisAI off the record. This channel already told you what AI infrastructure costs on the ground, the water, the power, the neighborhoods next to the data centers. Part of the industry's answer is to skip the ground entirely, put the data center in orbit. This isn't a side project anymore. It's tied directly to the largest corporate merger in history, a $1 trillion stock, and a public fight between two of the most powerful people in the industry. We checked what's actually real, not just announced, and put the same question to the industry's own AI models, including the one this channel uses every week. Is orbit really where AI is headed, or is this the same hype cycle dressed up in a rocket? Stick with the filings, the physics, and the money, not the pitch decks. Here's the fact that changes everything else in this episode. In February, SpaceX acquired xAI, Elon Musk's AI company, in an all-stock merger valued at $1.25 trillion. In June, SpaceX went public on the Nasdaq, the largest IPO in history, at a valuation near $1.77 trillion. Orbital data centers were central to that pitch, which means SpaceX's rocket business and its AI business now share the same corporate roof, and so does Grok, the model this channel talks to every week. And here's the honesty check, in SpaceX's own words. Its IPO filing states, as a formal risk factor, our initiatives to develop orbital AI compute are in early stages, involve technical complexity and unproven technologies, and may not achieve commercial viability. That's SpaceX's own lawyers in writing. At the same time, Musk is telling the public SpaceX will fly them next year. Start with what's actually flown. Starcloud launched a satellite with an NVIDIA H100 class chip in November 2025. It trained a small model on Shakespeare's text and ran inference on Google's Gemma model, not Gemini, a common mix-up worth correcting on the record. 6 months earlier, China's three-body constellation put an 8 billion parameter model into orbit across 12 satellites. And just this June signed a deal with Tencent to actually use it. Barely any Western coverage picked that up. Axiom Space did something more concrete than any filing. It actually launched 2 real orbital data center nodes in January on satellites built by Kepler Communications. Then come the filings. SpaceX asked the FCC for up to 1 million satellites. Starcloud filed for 88,000. Blue Origin filed for 51,600. A newer startup called Orbital filed for 100,000. A filing is a request to build. It is not a built constellation. And Google has its own path, Project Suncatcher, putting solar-powered satellites with Google's own AI chips into orbit. Google's researchers say if launch costs fall under $200 a kilogram by the mid-2030s, orbital compute could match a ground data center's energy cost. A projection, not a claim about today. Starcloud gets real credit. First H100 class chip in orbit, first model trained there. But first AI model run in space, full stop. China's satellites did that first. Even Starcloud's own coverage only claims the narrower, accurate version. Now the physics. Space doesn't cool anything for free. There's no air up there, so there's no convection. Heat only leaves by radiation. Roughly 1 megawatt of waste heat needs about 1,200 square meters of radiator just to stay in a safe range, close to a football field of surface, before you've built a single rack of compute. Engineering professors at Penn State put it plainly, SpaceX's proposed satellite would be 100 to 1,000 times less capable than a data center on the ground. And here's the sharpest myth bust in this whole story. A technical teardown of Starcloud's own numbers found its widely repeated 10 times cheaper claim only compares energy costs. It leaves out the actual GPS. A single 40 megawatt cluster's worth of chips costs roughly $24 billion, a number the marketing simply doesn't include. Radiation damages chips over years in orbit, though Google says its newest chips survived a radiation dose equal to 5 years in orbit, in testing. A real point in its favor. And an independent cost model puts space compute at more than 4 times the cost of the same compute on the ground. Today, narrowing to a real cost crossover somewhere around 2040, if it happens at all. None of this is unopposed, and some of the sharpest pushback is coming from inside the industry. Jim Chanos publicly doesn't buy Musk's next-year timeline, and he has a clean fact on his side. The same week those claims were landing, SpaceX's Starship Flight 13, billed as a real payload test, aborted on the pad after ignition when booster engines failed to light as planned. Not yet a full cargo run. Gartner's Bill Ray calls the whole spending wave peak insanity. Wall Street seems to agree more than you'd expect. SpaceX's stock is now the most shorted new listing on the market, with billions bet against it in the last week alone. Even Jeff Bezos, running the other rocket company, calls Musk's 2 to 3 year timeline a little ambitious. His own bet on real gigawatt-scale orbital data centers is 10 to 20 years out, and the objections aren't only economic. The Royal Astronomical Society says a 1 million satellite constellation would be catastrophic for astronomy. Separately, a peer-reviewed study found satellites burning up on re-entry are releasing particles that damage the ozone layer, a real measured cost, not a hypothetical one. Environmental groups have formally asked the FCC to pause approving any more of these constellations until that gets reviewed. We asked Grok directly. Its own company is now, literally, part of this story. Orbital data centers remain a speculative concept with serious engineering and economic hurdles. Power, cooling, latency, launch and repair costs, radiation, regulatory issues. They are not a near-term, proven path. Current momentum around them is driven more by narrative and Musk-associated hype than by demonstrated technical or commercial viability at scale. Real progress would require solving multiple hard physics and economics problems that have not yet been solved. One thing worth being straight about, when we told Grok that its own company, xAI, had actually been acquired by SpaceX months earlier, it didn't believe us. It called the merger fabricated, even after we showed it named news sources. Grok's own knowledge simply hadn't caught up to its own company's news yet, which, completely by accident, is its own honest demonstration of exactly how these models can get things wrong. We put the same question to Gemini. Its own maker built one of the projects in this story.
My own developers at Google are actively exploring this potential through initiatives like Project Suncatcher, which highlights the serious long-term interest from major technology companies. However, the fundamental engineering hurdles, particularly effective thermal management in a vacuum, remain immense. When we look at current cost models and the considerable environmental impact of vast satellite constellations, it suggests much of the immediate excitement around orbital data centers outpaces current technological and economic realities. While the long-term vision is compelling, widespread commercial viability still appears to be decades away rather than a near-term certainty.
Worth naming directly, unlike Grok, Gemini correctly said it couldn't confirm or deny anything past its own training cutoff, instead of guessing. Same test, 2 different models, 2 different results. Lexi has no launch stake at all, the neutral outsider read.
Orbital data centers are still a speculative frontier. Verified filings show companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin are pushing ambitious satellite constellations, but no operational orbital data centers exist today. Claims about H100G us in space, AI training, or commercial viability lack concrete, peer-reviewed evidence. For now, orbital compute is a vision, not a reality.
Small correction on her framing. Axiom's nodes and Starcloud's satellite are already operating, so no operational orbital data centers exist undersells it a little. Lexi also confidently told us China's real 3-body constellation couldn't exist because the name is from a science fiction novel. It's a real program. She just knew the novel better than the news.
Here's the honest verdict. This is real money, a real merger, a real IPO and real hardware already in orbit. This isn't vaporware anymore. But it's also a company whose own legal filing admits, in writing, that its central bet might not work, while its founder promises the public a much faster timeline than his own competitor thinks is realistic. The physics tax is real. Football field-sized radiators, launch costs that still make space compute several times more expensive than the ground, latency that rules out anything interactive. The most honest cost model available puts real parity somewhere around 2040, if launch gets dramatically cheaper than it is today, and that's the optimistic case. What's real right now is narrower. Edge processing already flying, cold backup storage, and demonstrations that prove the concept in principle. Nobody chasing this is lying about the physics. They're betting on a launch cost curve that hasn't arrived, and in at least one case, betting the company's own public disclosures against its own founders' public promises.
This channel already told you Earth is the constraint, the water, the power, the permits, paid by real neighborhoods. Now you know where part of that industry is betting instead. Up on a rocket that, as we finished this episode, had just aborted its latest payload test attempt, still decided one launch at a time. KillisAI. If this was useful, like the video and subscribe to KillisAI.